My father didn't whisper it. He said it like a business decision, cold, clean, final. Let him go. We won't pay for the surgery. I was lying there in a coma, tubes in my throat, blood dried on my hair, and he signed a do not resuscitate order just to save money. He thought I'd never hear it. He thought I'd never wake up. He didn't know my lawyer was standing 3 feet away recording every word he said. And when my eyes finally opened, I didn't scream. I didn't confront him. I did something far worse, something that stripped his empire to the bone and left him bankrupt in less than 24 hours. I'm Kai. And this is the story of how a son survived his father's choice to let him die. But before I begin, I'd really like to know you're here with me. Just say listening in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far my story reaches. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a moment like this feel less heavy. Thank you. And now, here's my story. And if you want to follow the rest of my journey, every truth, every scar, every step after betrayal, feel free to subscribe. Your support means more than you know. My name is Kai Lexington, and at 30, I held the title of Chief Legal Officer at Lexington Health Alliance, one of the most powerful healthcare networks in the Mountain States. Every morning when I stepped through the glass doors of our 40-story headquarters in downtown Denver, I felt the same contradiction. I belonged here, yet the building itself felt like a mirror of my father's values, not mine. It was sharp, cold, immaculate, and built on foundations I was only beginning to understand. From my office on the 32nd floor, I could see the full scope of the empire my father, Graham Lexington, constructed: 6 hospitals, dozens of clinics, thousands of employees, billions in annual revenue. On paper, my job was to ensure everything remained compliant with federal law. In reality, my days were spent untangling schemes the executive team led by my father preferred to bury rather than correct. The tension between us came to a head during a board meeting in the glass-walled conference room overlooking downtown Denver. My father slid a stack of documents toward me. Just sign it, Kai. We need it filed by the end of the quarter. I flipped through the pages supposedly detailing donations from the Lexington Innovate Fund. But the research institutions listed didn't exist. Half the grant recipients were shell companies registered to empty lots in Nevada. This is money laundering, I said flatly. If the Attorney General's office ever audits this, we're finished. My father didn't argue the law, he never did. Instead, he leaned back, disappointment sharpening his eyes. You're too moral for your own good, and too naive. Business requires a stomach for necessity. I closed the folder and pushed it back toward him. I'm not signing. His smile vanished. For the first time, I sensed not anger, but calculation. That night at the family estate in Cherry Hills Village, the divide widened. At dinner, my father recounted my refusal to sign the documents as if it were a joke, something to amuse his guests. Kai means well, he scoffed, raising a glass, but he doesn't understand the pressure of keeping an empire upright. Meanwhile, he praised my older brother, Silas Lexington, Health Alliance's CFO, for having the realistic mindset I lacked. Silas offered a weak, guilty smile, but said nothing. He never did. Later that evening, I overheard my father on a phone call behind his office door. No, I'll have the money before the merger is finalized. Stop calling. I froze. I recognized the tone, not confident, not strategic, desperate. As I drove away that night, I couldn't shake the sense that something inside our family was rotting from the core. My mind drifted to the trust fund my mother left me. Vivian Lexington, brilliant, gentle, and almost erased from the company's history, had built the foundation of our wealth through pharmaceutical patents. When she died, she left me a $20 million trust with unusual terms, locked until I turned 35. If I became permanently incapacitated, my father would take over as guardian of the fund, though I would remain the legal beneficiary. If I died without a spouse or children, the money transferred entirely to him. I had always believed the structure was meant to protect me. But during that board meeting, when I mentioned Mom, my father muttered something strange. Your mother died because she chose the wrong priorities. I won't make the same mistake. A chill ran down my spine. The sentence felt wrong, almost rehearsed, like he'd said it before in a different context. The merger with Rocky Mountain Healthcare Systems, worth $600 million, was looming. My father made sure everyone at dinner knew it. If this falls through, he declared, this family loses more than money. Yet when he spoke, all I heard was, if something threatens the deal, he will remove the threat no matter who or what it is. By the time I ended the night, a quiet truth settled inside me. I was the chief legal officer of this empire, and the only one in the family who didn't know the full story. If I had known then that my $20 million trust was already part of my father's contingency plan, I might never have gotten behind the wheel that night. I was 22 when my mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. My father told me it was hopeless, that aggressive treatment would only prolong her suffering. I believed him. I didn't know enough to question anything, and grief made me pliant. She died within months, never undergoing a single intensive therapy. For years, I accepted his version of the story until a chance meeting changed everything. At a medical conference in Boulder, I ran into a doctor who had been part of her case review. During casual conversation, he said almost offhand, if treatment had started right after diagnosis, she might have had a 30 or 40% chance. But the hospital waited on the family's decision a bit too long. My blood ran cold. The timeline my father gave me didn't match the medical reality. Shortly after her funeral 8 years earlier, I remembered another moment I hadn't fully understood, then a man in a modest suit approaching me. Maverick Doyle, my mother's personal attorney. He handed me an envelope she had written for me before she died. Inside was a letter in her handwriting. Never let anyone have full control over your life, not even family. And a copy of the trust fund contract. Maverick spent hours explaining the fine print to me. At 22, I didn't grasp the weight of those clauses. But now, as an attorney myself, the implications were suffocating. If I ever became incapacitated, my father would control everything. If I died young, he would inherit it all. Years later, sitting across from Maverick in a cafe in Denver's Lodo district, I told him about the shady paperwork in the Innovate Fund and the growing unease I felt around my father. Maverick asked one simple question. If you were unconscious in a hospital, do you trust the man who benefits financially from your death to decide your treatment? My answer was silence. Maverick then suggested something that felt extreme at the time. We create a separate legal and medical directive naming him. Not my father as the person authorized to make all decisions if I became incapacitated. He also recommended that I grant him permission to record on any mind conversation involving my medical care in an emergency fully legal under Colorado law if written in advance. It felt strange, like drafting a survival plan for a disaster that might never come. But I signed. And Maverick filed everything discreetly through the state court system using his own address. No one in my family knew. The company's legal department didn't know. To the outside world, Graham would still appear to be the sole decision-maker if anything happened to me. Meanwhile, I dug deeper into financial reports at work. Strange transactions surfaced, insider-like stock trades made days before merger discussions became public charitable funds, rerouted through shell corporations' offshore accounts linked to anonymous beneficiaries. The pattern smelled of desperation, not strategy. Something was collapsing behind the scenes, and my father was hiding it. At the end of Chapter 2, I finally admitted what had been echoing in my mind since that night. I had a $20 million trust, a father under immense financial pressure, and a set of legal documents he didn't know existed. I believed those papers would protect me. I didn't know then that they would turn a hospital ICU into the first courtroom my father ever lost. I spent the next week buried in financial records that should have been routine, but every file I opened felt like another loose floorboard in a house built on rot. As chief legal officer, I had the authority to request full documentation from accounting, and for the first time I exercised it without telling my father. What I found didn't resemble accounting errors, they were red flags waving in my face. Payments labeled as medical consulting fees went to entities with no websites, no office addresses, nothing but P.O. boxes in Nevada. Receipts for international medical conferences were tied to Las Vegas casinos and private tables in Atlantic City. Losses disguised as travel, gambling debts dressed up as continuing education. I pushed the files across Silas's desk one afternoon. What is this? These aren't mistakes, Silas. These are cover-ups. He rubbed his face exhausted in a way I hadn't seen before. Kai, let it go. I'm handling it. You're not handling it. You're drowning in it, I said quietly. His eyes avoided mine. It was the closest I'd ever seen him come to admitting something without speaking a word. 2 nights later, I was leaving the office long past midnight when I walked past my father's door half closed. His voice was sharp, low urgent. I already told you, after the merger, that was the agreement. You'll get your money when the merger clears. A muffled voice growled back, too faint for words but not faint enough to hide the threat behind them. I caught fragments: Russia, interest, deadline. My breath stalled. This wasn't a worried investor or a pushy banker. This was the kind of debt that didn't come with monthly statements. The kind collected by men who used broken bones as late fees. For the first time, I understood that my father wasn't simply reckless. He was trapped. Trapped and dragging the company, the family, and anyone near him into the pit with him. The next morning, during an internal briefing on the upcoming merger, he spoke with polished confidence about stability, growth, and future vision. But when he pulled me aside afterward, his words shifted. You know, Kai, he said gently, your mother wanted that trust to be used for something meaningful. Not just sit there until you're 35. The trust can't be touched while I'm competent, I reminded him. And it can't be touched by you while I'm alive. He smiled, thin and cold. Life doesn't always unfold the way we expect. Accidents happen. One day you're fine, the next day. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. I forced myself to keep my expression neutral. Are you threatening me? I'm stating reality, he murmured, and reminding you that you shouldn't speak in absolutes. Later that day, I told Maverick everything about the phone call, the debts, the way my father hinted about the trust fund. Maverick didn't look surprised. He only said a man with that much pressure on him will look for the easiest solution, and right now, that solution is you. He suggested we strengthen the safeguards, update the state medical directive registry, notify the entire hospital network of his legal authority, ensure no physician in Colorado could claim ignorance if I arrived unconscious. I agreed. I left the meeting feeling like I had finally built a fortress around myself. I didn't know that in a matter of weeks, that same fortress would become the silent witness that recorded my father's downfall. A few days later, I drove to Colorado Springs for a pre-merger meeting with Rocky Mountain's legal team. They were sharper than Lexington executives expected, probing into the exact same irregularities I had flagged. The tension in the room felt like a rubber band stretched to its limit. By the time the meeting ended, snow was drifting across the parking lot and the sky had fallen into a dull, icy gray. I was exhausted but eager to return to Denver. Maverick had texted me minutes earlier. I found something important. We need to talk tomorrow. I merged onto I-25, watching snow swirl across the windshield. The lane markers blurred. The road felt too quiet. When the headlights behind me flared bright and a horn blasted far too long, I tightened my grip on the wheel. I remember thinking the biggest problem in my life was a collapsing merger and a father who was in debt to dangerous men. I didn't know that within seconds metal would crush around me and that my father would soon decide whether my life was worth more than $20 million. I don't remember the moment metal hit metal. I remember the sensation like the world snapped in half. The blinding flash of headlights cutting across my lane, the scream of a horn, the violent spin of my car as if gravity lost patience with me. Then glass-shattered steel folded and something cracked against my skull. Darkness swallowed everything. Somewhere far away, I heard someone shouting, "Call 911, someone's trapped." Then even that disappeared. I drifted in and out of awareness inside a white fog. Voices came through like echoes underwater. Machines beeped in steady rhythm. Someone touched my hand. Someone wiped blood from my face. Words cut in and out. Glasgow 6. Cranial trauma, good reflexes. He's young. Prognosis is hopeful. A woman's voice, steady, confident, rose above the rest. I later learned it belonged to Dr. Rowan Pierce. "We need to treat aggressively," she said. "He has a real chance." Then everything faded again. I didn't know until later that Maverick arrived before my father. The hospital called him first because of the paperwork I'd signed months earlier. He presented the documents secured his right to be present in all decisions, and per my authorization activated a small recorder clipped inside his jacket. He placed it discreetly on a counter in the ICU room. That device would become the single most important piece of evidence in my father's life. 4 hours after the crash, Graham Lexington finally walked in. He wasn't frantic. He wasn't shaken. He entered the ICU like entering a boardroom flanked by 2 attorneys wearing a tailored coat posture, straight expression, unreadable. Maverick told me later that the first words out of his mouth were, "What's the probability he ends up in a persistent vegetative state? Not, is he alive? Not, will he recover? Not, my son." What happened? Dr. Pierce calmly explained the situation. She told him I had a strong chance of recovery with proper treatment. She emphasized my reflex responses, my age, the neurological indicators, all pointing toward a favorable outcome. He didn't ask about treatment. He asked about cost, length of stay, long-term care expenses, insurance coverage, the financial burden. Then he shifted. He asked his estate attorney point blank, "If he never wakes up, can I access the trust?" The attorney replied that only permanent death without spouse or children would transfer the money to him. Silence. Then my father's tone changed. He began speaking about quality of life, about not prolonging suffering, and he claimed falsely that I had once told him I'd never want to live in a state of dependency. Dr. Pierce stood her ground. "There is no medical justification for a DNR here," she said firmly. "He is stable enough for surgery and has an excellent chance of neurological recovery." My father brushed her off. "Then I'll get another doctor." He called in Dr. Calder Royce, an internal medicine physician with a reputation everyone whispered about but never mentioned aloud. He owed my father favors. And he didn't question a single thing Graham claimed. He looked at the chart for barely a minute and said, "If the family believes it's best to avoid aggressive care, then we can sign the DNR." Dr. Pierce objected again. "Harder. He has a 70% chance of meaningful recovery." She was ignored. Then Silas walked in. He froze when he saw the DNR forms. "Dad, what is this?" They said Kai could recover. For a moment, I like to imagine he considered fighting for me. But my father took him aside, still within range of Maverick's recorder. He spoke about the CFO position Silas was poised to keep after the merger, about the debts Silas owed, about what would happen if the company collapsed. Minutes later, Silas came back to the bed and signed as a witness. He told me he'd never want to live like that, he muttered, his voice barely audible. And with that signature, my father had everything he needed. The DNR was signed. Not because the doctors gave up. Not because I had no chance. But because $20 million was easier to collect from a dead son than from a living one. I learned all of this weeks later, listening to the recording from the bed I was never meant to wake up in. But even then, even as I lay unconscious, machines breathing for me, something remarkable was happening. My father believed he had secured his financial salvation. Instead, in those 23 minutes, he had built the perfect case against himself. Every word he spoke was preserved. Every motive laid bare. Every choice recorded. And while I wasn't awake to witness any of it, the future version of me, the one who would open his eyes again, would use those 23 minutes to bring down the entire empire he had built on everyone else's suffering, including mine. The first time I woke up fully, it felt like surfacing from the bottom of a lake. Fluorescent lights blurred above me, my throat scraped against the breathing tube, and every muscle trembled as if I'd been assembled wrong. But my mind was clear, painfully clear. Dr. Rowan leaned over me with a relieved smile. "Kai, can you hear me?" Squeeze my hand. I squeezed. She tested my recall, my name, her name, the year the president and I answered every question. Her shoulders dropped with visible relief. "You're doing far better than expected," she said. "We can start rehabilitation soon." But the real shock came hours later, when Maverick closed the door, sat beside my bed, and placed a pair of headphones gently over my ears. "I need you to hear something," he said. And then I heard it, my father's voice, cold and steady inside that ICU room. "Let him go." We won't pay for the surgery. My breath seized, then Silas's voice hesitant shaking, signing as a witness, then the talk of my trust fund as if my life were a withdrawal slip. When the audio ended, I lay in silence, staring at the ceiling, feeling something inside me calcify. They were willing to let me die, I whispered. They expected you to, Maverick said. Dr. Rowan joined us shortly after. She laid out the neurological findings, perfect indicators for recovery, nothing that could justify a DNR. Maverick outlined the legal implications. The recording was valid under Colorado law because I'd pre-authorized it. The DNR was signed under false pretenses. The intent was unmistakable. We could have exposed him right then. But I wasn't just my father's son anymore. I was the one person who knew exactly when and how to break him. I'm not confronting him yet, I said. Not until he's deep enough that there's no way out. Dr. Rowan understood immediately, so I began to act. The next time my father visited, I blinked up at him with foggy confusion. Dad, I said slowly. Are you my dad? His entire posture softened relief, yes, but also calculation. That's right, son. You're safe. I've been taking care of everything. He pulled out a stack of papers, temporary guardianship forms, and guided my hand to sign. I let my signature wobble. I asked childish questions. I acted overwhelmed by the paperwork. And he believed every second of it. When the psychiatrist arrived, handpicked by my father's network, I performed again, answering simple questions wrong, stumbling through memory tests, failing arithmetic I could normally do in my sleep. His report concluded I had cognitive impairment and should not manage high-value assets. Perfect. Meanwhile, Dr. Rowan quietly sent my medical scans to 3 independent neurologists across the country, each one confirming I'd never met the criteria for a DNR. The final blow came when Maverick showed me a copy of the guardianship filing my father submitted to the court. Attached to it was a pre-drafted transfer order moving $20 million from my trust into Lexington Health Alliance's Emergency Operating Fund. Dated for the day he expected to be granted full guardianship. He hadn't just planned for my death, he'd planned for my incompetence. If he couldn't kill me physically, he'd kill me legally. So I leaned back in my hospital bed, heart pounding with a new clarity. If he wanted me to be an incapacitated puppet, fine. I'd play the role. And he would keep tightening the rope around his own neck. By the time he realized the puppet was holding the other end, it would be too late. Tomorrow's hearing would be the next step and the next piece of evidence. My father thought he was taking control of my life. In reality, I was turning myself into a walking legal weapon. And he was marching straight into the trigger. The Denver County Courthouse felt more like a stage than a courtroom. My father walked in wearing a sympathetic expression practiced to perfection. I arrived in a wheelchair blanket over my lap, head slightly tilted as if confusion blurred the edges of the world. I wasn't proud of the performance, but I was committed to it. When the judge asked my name, I answered softly, hesitating just long enough to seem impaired. When asked the year, I said the wrong one. When asked what the hearing was about, I murmured, "My dad helps me with stuff." My father smiled warmly at the judge. "Your Honor, I'm just trying to protect my son during his recovery." Maverick pushed back, but only slightly. He didn't want to win yet. Not here. Not in a room presided over by Judge Franklin Reeves, a man who'd attended Lexington charity galas for a decade and played golf with my father every Sunday. The favoritism radiated off him like heat. Within minutes, he ruled in my father's favor, temporary guardianship approved. My father placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder as if he hadn't signed my death warrant just days before. But outside the courtroom, Maverick handed me a copy of the full transcript. "Every biased ruling is more evidence," he said. "Let him win today. It'll help us bury him tomorrow." Meanwhile, the real battle was brewing elsewhere. The FBI and SEC had taken an interest in our documentation, the offshore accounts, the suspicious stock trades, before merger announcements, the charity funds that didn't reach any charities. Maverick and I met federal agents in a quiet conference room. I kept up the facade of fogginess but spoke with just enough clarity to give them everything they needed. The Vegas losses disguised as medical conferences. The insider trades before merger leaks. The tense phone call about Russian creditors. They didn't tell me details, but their eyes said enough. They smelled blood. Inside Lexington Health Alliance, cracks were forming. Rumors about my DNR circulated. A nurse anonymously informed the board that she'd been pressured to exaggerate my impairment in charts. 3 independent board members, the few not tied to my father, started asking questions. One of them, Dr. Evelyn Marks, requested a full review of the hospital's DNR protocols. Maverick quietly encouraged her interest, slipping hints without revealing too much. Then came the moment I'd dreaded yet planned for. My father executed the transfer order, moving my $20 million into the company's emergency fund. I felt physically sick reading the document, but Maverick gripped my shoulder. "Let it go through on paper," he said. "It won't clear. The feds will freeze it. But the act itself, that's the nail in the coffin." He was right. The money wasn't the point. The intent was. The next morning, my father arrived in my hospital room wearing the bright smile of a man about to be crowned king. "Kai, I want you to come to the shareholders' meeting tomorrow," he said. "It would mean the world if people see you recovering. It'll show strength." I tilted my head with practiced innocence. "Do I have to talk?" He chuckled. No. Just sit there, like a prop. A human PR device." He left the room satisfied, believing I was too damaged to understand anything. But that night, alone with the city lights of Denver flickering through the window, I reviewed everything one last time: audio recordings, medical reports, transfer documents, federal notices. All organized, all corroborated, all ready. Tomorrow morning, my father would walk into the Colorado Springs ballroom, certain he was moments away from securing the biggest merger in the Mountain States. He would step onto that stage believing the room belonged to him. But in reality, the room already belonged to me. And he had no idea that the son he left for dead would stand up literally and figuratively and destroy the empire he'd built on lies, fear, and blood. Tomorrow wasn't just a meeting. It was Judgment Day. The Broadmoor in Colorado Springs was buzzing like a political convention when I arrived, sweeping red carpets, towering banners of Lexington Health Alliance and Rocky Mountain Healthcare Systems investors in tailored suits, and reporters already jockeying for camera angles. I stayed slumped in the wheelchair, letting an aide push me through the lobby as my father approached guests with the confidence of a man about to secure his crown. "This is my son Kai," he said proudly, "a miracle of our system's care." I kept my eyes soft and unfocused, playing the damaged son he needed me to be. Inside, I recited every word he'd spoken in the ICU when he thought I was already gone. He stepped onto the stage, bathed in spotlights, greeting shareholders and executives with the practiced warmth of a seasoned kingmaker. His presentation was polished charts, projections, promises of expansion and innovation. He praised Lexington Innovate as the humanitarian heart of the company. And then he used my accident as emotional leverage, describing my recovery as proof of Lexington's excellence. He left out the part where he approved a DNR. When he gestured for me to wave something in, me clicked into place. I gripped the armrests, pushed myself up, and stood fully upright. The room went silent. Dozens of phones lifted. My father froze. I reached for a microphone. "My name is Kai Lexington," I said clearly. "And before any signatures happen today, we need to discuss a matter of medical ethics." I saw panic ripple across his face. I began with the clinical facts of my injury, the neurological evaluations, the 70% chance of full recovery, the consensus from independent experts showing I never met criteria for a DNR. Their statements appeared on the screen behind me, cold, official, irrefutable. Despite this, I said someone signed a do not resuscitate order on my behalf. I paused, letting the room absorb the implication. Then I introduced Maverick Doyle as my legal representative and explained the pre-authorized recording he made in the ICU. And now I said, my voice steady, you will hear precisely what was said. The audio played through the hall, clear, brutal damning. My father asking about lifelong disability. My father asking if my trust would transfer to him. My father saying the words, "Let him go. We won't pay for the surgery." The crowd reacted instantly, gasps, whispers, a few people standing in disbelief. Rocky Mountain's delegation huddled together, their expressions sharp and alarmed. A handful of reporters were already live streaming. When the audio ended, silence swallowed the room. Then came the breaking point. Dr. Evelyn Marks, a board member and former physician, stood up and addressed the chair. I motioned for an emergency board meeting to reassess Mr. Lexington's status as CEO. Rocky Mountain's lead negotiator stepped forward and announced the merger would be paused. We cannot move forward under these circumstances. A few investors left the hall altogether, phones pressed to their ears. I didn't stop there. I projected the financial trails onto the screen funds from Lexington Innovate flowing into shell companies, then offshore accounts. I exposed the transfer order for my $20 million. I laid out the pattern of insider trades before merger leaks. This isn't just about me, I said. It's about a CEO who used his son's life and his late wife's inheritance to cover the holes in a system he hollowed out. Security approached my father as the board formally suspended his signing authority. His shoulders sagged as the room moved on without him, conversations swirling, alliances flipping in real time. He was escorted out the back, not arrested, not yet, but stripped of the power he'd spent his life sculpting. When Maverick and I exited the stage, cameras followed us, but I barely noticed. I looked back once and saw my father standing behind the curtains, small, irrelevant, unheard. That was the end of his kingdom, and the beginning of everything that would come next. I wasn't in the boardroom when they voted, but the updates came quickly. Maverick sat beside me in a private lounge at the Broadmoor, forwarding emails and messages from 3 different directors. The board moved fast. They cited ethical violations, financial misconduct, and gross abuse of guardianship authority. They stripped my father of the CEO role and froze his voting rights. A respected physician administrator was named interim CEO, pledging full cooperation with investigators and a comprehensive review of every DNR in the system. Within hours, the FBI executed a warrant on Lexington headquarters. Agents seized servers and boxes of financial documents. SEC officials began tracking the pre-merger trades. The state health department launched an inquiry into DNR misuse throughout the network. Over the following weeks, I served as both victim and whistleblower, giving testimony that peeled back every layer of rot inside the empire my father once ran like a fiefdom. Silas visited me one evening. He looked nothing like the polished CFO he had been, just a hollow man who had finally confronted the consequences of his cowardice. He confessed everything: the debts, the pressure, the desperation that drove him to sign the DNR witness line. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, placing a drive full of documents on my desk. "But you deserve the truth." Inside the files were records connecting my father to offshore accounts, falsified audits, and meetings with men tied to a Russian criminal network. It didn't end there. Through investigations and Silas's documents, the truth about my mother's death finally surfaced. Years ago, when she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, my father delayed aggressive treatment, not because it was futile, but because he needed liquid capital for a major acquisition. Those lost weeks destroyed her chances. He repeated the same lines back then that he tried to use on me: quality of life, comfort over suffering. He covered his negligence with compassion-scented lies. After the acquisition, he spiraled deeper, gambling borrowed money and dealings with organized crime. When the Russians threatened to expose what he'd done to my mother, he panicked. Killing me wasn't only about my trust. It was insurance. If I died, the last witness to his oldest crime would die with me. In the months that followed his removal, the Lexington name was scrubbed from the company's branding. His personal assets were seized. He faced multiple charges: fraud, insider trading, endangerment. Then one afternoon, Maverick handed me a letter. My father, now terminally ill, had written from his attorney's office. He confessed everything in plain language: my mother, the debts, the ICU decision. He included a small final sum, asking that it be added to the foundation I'd created in my mother's honor. I accepted the money. I did not accept the man. Forgiveness is not a requirement of healing. Sometimes survival is enough. With my trust restored, I opened the Vivian Foundation, a program supporting brain injury patients denied treatment due to insurance loopholes and families harmed by unethical DNR decisions. I returned to legal work, partnering with physicians like Dr. Rowan to challenge systems that profit from denying care. Months later, standing in a hospital conference room, I faced administrators debating whether to cut off life-sustaining treatment for a teenage patient because the cost exceeded the projected benefit. I looked at them and felt the cold echo of my father's voice. When I spoke, the room went still. When you assign a price to a human life, you stop being healers or leaders, I said. You become merchants of bodies. I don't know if I'll ever forgive my father, but I know this: I am the son he once signed a DNR for. And because of that, the rest of my life will be spent protecting people from those willing to say what he said. Let him go. We won't pay for the surgery.
My personal thoughts on the story. This story left me speechless, furious, and deeply shaken. It's one of the darkest family betrayals I've ever come across. The moment Graham, Kai's own father, stood over his comatose son in the ICU and coldly said, "We won't pay for the surgery. Let him go," while signing the DNR so he could steal the $20 million trust left by Kai's late mother, that scene genuinely made my blood run cold. The fact that Graham had already delayed his wife's cancer treatment years earlier just to trigger the same payout turns him into an absolute monster in my eyes. Yet what truly blew me away was Kai's brilliance and resilience. The man was in a medically induced coma, completely vulnerable, and still won, because he had planned years ahead, appointing Maverick as his medical power of attorney, allowing secret recordings, and setting legal traps. Pretending to have cognitive decline after waking up just to bait his father and uncle into confessing on tape was next-level strategic patience. The boardroom scene where he stood up, played the recording, exposed the offshore fraud, and watched the $600 million merger collapse, and then quietly walked away with full control, gave me goosebumps and the sweetest taste of justice. The final touch, founding the Viven Foundation to help patients denied critical care, turned personal tragedy into something meaningful. It's heartbreaking, rage-inducing, and inspiring all at once. Lessons I take away. Protect yourself legally long before you ever need it. Advance healthcare directives, trusted medical proxies, revocable trusts, and recorded consent can literally save your life when family turns predatory. Do it while you're healthy. Don't wait for the accident. Greed can make monsters out of parents and siblings. Never assume blood relations guarantee loyalty when large sums of money are involved. Offshore accounts, delayed medical care, forged signatures, these aren't just plot devices, they happen in real life. Regular financial transparency and third-party oversight in family trusts can prevent a lot of evil. Justice doesn't have to be loud, it just has to be smart and patient. Kai didn't scream or fight in the hospital. He gathered evidence, stayed calm, and struck at the perfect moment with undeniable proof. That's a masterclass in turning victimhood into victory. Healing is possible, but it's a choice. Accepting his father's dying confession and still choosing to do good with the money shows incredible strength. Revenge would have been easy. Redemption and restitution are much harder and far more powerful.